Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, the moment is finally here. On a Sunday morning, drinking our cup of coffee, top 10 players for Michigan rolling into 2025. And let's just be quite frank about it. The most important conversation we are probably going to have all episode is the players who are not on this list. Right, true freshman quarterback Bryce Underwood. Look, he's about 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns away against New Mexico and being a top 5 player on this roster for me. You probably can't put him on just yet. I look at a guy like Andrew Sprague, very similar conversation. Look, the spot duty we saw him play in that bowl game against Alabama, I could see Andrew Sprague being one of the best tackles in this conference. There's a lot of players on this roster that you're sitting here in July. You probably can't put as top 10 players right now, but certainly could be top 10 players midway through October. I'm fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, to the Michigan fans, please let it fly in the comment section. My brother and I, both Michigan fans. I am sure we are going to get into it at points here. Our feelings will not get hurt. There are a lot of different ways that you can stack these football players. Let it rip. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, let's just I just kind of jotted down some names that I kind of felt like could be top 10 players at some point. You can answer Bryce Underwood. Who do you think is that player on this list that very well could be a top 10 player come the middle of October?
And Rod Moore is the obvious one, because if Rod Moore is full and healthy, he's a top 5 player. I mean, he was a top 10 player easily on that 2023 team. That was obviously one of the better teams I think college football has ever seen, especially on defense. So he's obviously one. Bablow and Sprague are 2 guys who I'm looking at. I think you'd love to see one of them kind of get into that, because you look, I don't know that there is a top 10 player on this Michigan team from the offensive line. I don't think you included one, and that's probably fair. That can't be how Michigan operates. They need a couple of good offensive linemen. I mean, you want to.
And that's a good point. And it's not like, El Hadi or a guy like Greg Crippen or maybe an Evan Link. It's not like they don't have the opportunity to maybe get into the top 10. But when you're talking about ceiling, when you're talking about who can be some of the better offensive linemen in this conference, it probably starts with Andrew Sprague. We'll see where Andrew Babelow is. But those are the guys that offer a really high ceiling for this Michigan offensive line. Dill, I would throw in Trey Pierce. I think he's certainly, I think a lot of us talk about Rashawn Benny, rightfully so. He'll be on the list. I think a lot of us talk about the transfers and Trey Williams and Damon Payne. Really excited what year 3 looks like for both Trey Pierce and Eno Etta. They're being coached by a guy in Lou Esposito, who I think is one of the best player developers in the entire country. I excited about those young cats. Let's get into the top 10. And Dill, it's one of your personal favorites, right? TJ Mechaf. Now, I want to preface this with, when the Mechaf brothers committed to Michigan in the winter, we primarily talked about TJ Mechaf. He was the guy that, hey, that's probably an impact guy immediately for Michigan in the back end. Little did we know his little brother, Tavis Mechaf, very well could be one of the better players in this Michigan secondary as well. I'm going to go with TJ Mechaf because he's put it on the football field in the SEC in the 2024 year. What's he bring to the table for Michigan in the back end here?
Just a really well-rounded safety. I think you love his ability to come up in the box and make a lot of tackles and be physical there. I think probably best off as being kind of a deep safety for the most part.
Agreed.
Probably the one place you're not sure is man coverage. Like, is he elite in that department, if you will? Maybe not. And that's where his brother comes in probably a little bit more. It's like, who's going to play that nickel for Michigan?
Yes.
It certainly sounds like he's going to be in the game for that. But in terms of just being a really clean safety prospect, TJ Mechaf did a really good job at Arkansas.
Dill, when I am evaluating players that, look, I'll be the first one to put my hand up and say I did not go back and watch every single Arkansas game from 2024. Just wasn't going to do it. When I look at and evaluate some of these guys coming the portal, I'll certainly go back and watch some games. And TJ Mechaf, you can tell this kid gets it. He is a very, very instinctual safety that knows what he's doing, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. 730 snaps played, one of the highest on that Arkansas defense last year. What does that tell me? This kid was a redshirt freshman last year, did not leave the football field for an Arkansas defense that wasn't horrible. Like, that Arkansas team as a whole wasn't great. That Arkansas defense at times played some really good football. TJ Mechaf barely left the football field. That tells me that coaching staff, they trusted in him a lot. They liked him a lot. And you kind of got that vibe when you turned on some of TJ Mechaf from Arkansas as a redshirt freshman in 2024. Going number 9 and arguably one of the most important players on this roster, Donovan McCully. Now, the spring propaganda was out for Donovan McCully. I've heard Sherrone Moore, and this is Sherrone Moore speaking, ain't me, that he reminds us of Nico Collins. He brings that value that Nico Collins brought to our offense. Dill, that is high praise for Donovan McCully. I probably wouldn't have had him in the top 10 list if it was just, hey, this is Donovan McCully coming in. You didn't hear much from him. I probably wouldn't have had Donovan McCully in the top 10 list if you were to go back to the January month. But after what I've heard in spring practice from both the coaches, the players, and then the inside sources, I'm kind of okay with putting Donovan McCully in the top 10 heading into 2025.
And he's such a tough one to get a read because I still always harken back to the Illinois game he played for Indiana in 2023.
He's awesome.
Where okay, that's a big physical dominant receiver. He was drawing a lot of penalties. He was just being like that force where if he got his one-on-one matchups, he felt really hard to deal with. And frankly, Michigan needs somebody to play that way. Did you see it consistently enough for him to easily say he's a top 10 player on this Michigan team? Probably not. But again, you certainly saw the flashes. Obviously, a guy who was making a position change throughout his college career.
Look, Bill, that's what excites me, and that's what I'd really like to emphasize here. I don't think Michigan fans probably realize this because if you're a Michigan fan, you watched Donovan McCully play quarterback against us back in the day. This kid's still getting better at the sport. I don't say that very often for guys that I think he's going into year 5 of his college football career. Normally, you don't see these guys. When you watch a player in year 4, that's probably the player that you're going to get in year 5 too. You look at Donovan McCully and say, although he's going into year 5, he's only going into year 3 of being a full-time wide receiver. I think there's some meat left on the bone for Donovan McCully. And Dill, you mentioned that Illinois game, true wide receiver 1 vibes. Michigan needs that badly in 2025. And if you are sitting here picking who's going to be our wide receiver 1, the leader in the clubhouse comfortably is Donovan McCully. Love the 11 contested catches. Michigan just didn't have that kind of wide receiver last year. Hey, who's the wide receiver that's going to go up and make plays for the quarterback? There wasn't one last year outside of Colston Loveland. Donovan McCully can be that guy for Michigan. Number 8 on the list, Dill, Zeke Barry. I think this is fair, right? Was it awesome from Zeke Barry in 2024? No, but the value of him just playing different positions, not really coming off the field. Again, 629 snaps. That was top 5 on the team. This was a guy that, Wink Martindale, Sherrone Moore, Lamar Morgan clearly had a lot of trust in. Now, there are things that you want to see get cleaned up, like a 27% missed tackle rate, probably a little bit higher than many Michigan fans want. But the versatility and the reliability that Zeke Barry gave Michigan, I think he's well deserving of a top 10 spot on this roster.
And another guy when he really kind of nailed in that they were going to play him at corner and that's what he was going to do. I felt like he was a guy who took big strides over.
Yeah, that's fair.
I thought the Indiana game, he played awesome, a really, really good game against a really good passing attack. Thought he was good against Ohio State. Again, I think he gave up 1 to Jeremiah Smith, but Jeremiah Smith's a monster, but you look at the way Michigan was able to kind of put a lid on teams by the end of the year. Zeke Barry is a big part of that, and I thought his shoring up that other cornerback spot next to JaMarr Hill was massive.
Michigan's secondary came together in a big-time way in the month of November. Against Alabama, they came up big. I thought they certainly were good enough against Ohio State, Indiana. That's what really excites me about this defense. As much as people want to, and look, I'm not saying Mason Graham and Kenneth Graham weren't big deals because they were about as big a deals as you can get. Everybody wants to just point to that and say Michigan's going to get worse on defense. I thought you saw this defense play their best football late in the season. If they can kind of just pick up where they left off, year 2 with Wink Martin, that's why it was so important. Look, I fully recognize Wink Martindale's not going to be on this Michigan coaching staff forever. Totally recognize it. Thought it was really big to get him back for 1 more year because I thought this Michigan defense finally found their stride. And Zeke Barry, I guess why I went on that tirade right there, is Zeke Barry is one of those guys that really started to figure it out. Number 7 on the list still, TJ Guy. This feels low. And this feels really low, to be honest. TJ Guy, one of the best pure pass rushers in the Big Ten last year. 21% pass rush win rate, 5.5 sacks. Still, that was second on this Michigan football team in 2024. Think about all the pass rushes you had. TJ Guy was second, 15 quarterback hurries. The question for TJ Guy, at least in my opinion, is can you be that all-purpose edge defender? We know you can rip it off the edge. We know you're one of the best pass rushers on this football team. Can you be that guy against the run on first and second down? It's not that he can't do it. We just didn't see him do it in 2024. If he can do that, he's probably top 5 player in this roster.
Well, especially because like there's elements against the run that he's good at. When he's running and chasing, he is very effective. I feel like against the run, it's like yeah, when they want to run at you and put a tight end on your side, can you do what Derek Moore does? Like when he has a tight end on him, he can really just manhandle that guy. Like TJ Guy puts that other part into his game. You got a well-rounded pass. Like you don't just have a great Ferrari pass rusher, which I think he really started to develop into. You got a guy, kind of closer to like one of Derek.
That's so important because you look at when Michigan's playing their best football. Like their edge defenders are not only really good pass rushers, but go look at the history. Derek Moore, a guy like Jalen Harrell, like these guys were hammers against the run too. If you want an elite pass rush, well, it starts with stopping the run on first and second down, like forcing those third and long situations where a guy like TJ Guy can pin his ears back, get after the quarterback. Can TJ Guy be the guy? I like that. Can TJ Guy be the guy that stops the run for Michigan at an effective manner in 2025? Number 6, Jordan. All right, I tried to limit the projections, right? Like I left Bryce Underwood off the list. I left Andrew Sprague off the list, even though damn well I feel like both of them are going to be top 10 players on this roster. I'm willing to break the rules for Jordan Marshall. And look, I'll start with this. If you want to have Justice Haynes in this spot, I view them as just the same. It's just like two really, really good running backs. What we saw from Jordan Marshall, small sample size, but against Alabama in the bowl game, top 25 run defense in the country, 12 missed tackles forced, 82 yards after contact. Jordan Marshall, that was the best running back performance that we've seen from Michigan all year last year. Now, he didn't play a ton to start the year as he was a true freshman. What we saw in that Alabama game, I'm willing to put him as a top 6 guy on this Michigan roster in 2025.
Yeah, I'm total. I thought he was it almost was frustrating. Like, why wasn't he playing?
I kind of agree with that.
Like again, what he was doing against Alabama and breaking tackles and making things happen and running physically. Like
and Bill, here's the thing with Jordan Marshall is we're hearing all of those the right things in spring. So it's like what we saw in that Alabama game, that's lining up with what we're hearing from this kid in spring practice, in summer workouts going into fall camp, which makes me feel even better about projecting Jordan Marshall to be this kind of football player. Because look, the top 5 players on this roster, dang good. Can I get up here and just talk JaMarr Hill for a second? I feel like we've gone too far. Look, it was JaMarr Hill a perfect cornerback last year? No. Did he make some mistakes? Yes, absolutely. We're acting like this kid is like a complete wild card, like not a trustworthy cornerback. That is so far from the truth. He was awesome for Michigan in 2024. That's not saying he was perfect, but he was much better than I feel like the narrative crept in that, hey, JaMarr Hill needs to be more consistent, which is a fair evaluation of his game. But then we just started leaning too much into it. Like, this guy's one of the best cornerbacks in the Big Ten rolling into 2025. Go look at the numbers. Still, 57% completion percentage when targeted, 57 targets. That's a dang good number. Only 1 penalty, only an 11% missed tackle rate, 9.8 yards per catch allowed. It's not like he was routinely giving up the big play like I feel like a lot of people act like he was 2024. I look at JaMarr Hill and say, what excites me is, yes, there's a lot of meat left on the bone. I think this kid can really become one of the best cornerbacks in the country in 2025, but he was not nearly as inconsistent as I feel like a lot of people like to say heading into the 2025 year.
Yeah, and I think he has all the talent to be a really premier number 1 corner, because I look at like how sticky he can be at the size he is with the length he has, and then his ability to play the ball in the air is probably the big one without like panicking. I mean, that's probably something you saw him start to develop, like that play against Minnesota. That might be one of the better plays I've seen a cornerback make. I feel like his game, you kind of said, I feel like Wink Martindale said he was getting beat on double moves too much. And I feel like the whole world's taken that as like, he was just getting beat constantly with double moves. Like, I think you can probably count like 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
They happen, but like, I mean, he was a real number one, like Big Ten corner. I'm kind of with you. I don't really get the narrative that he was like this suspect guy who you can't trust.
Yeah, I feel like it's gone a little too far. Number 4, Rashawn Benny. Can he take the jump? You know what I mean? Like he's one of the more underrated players in the country, right? You know, with Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, and how dominant they were, nobody really talked about Rashawn Benny the last couple of years. Really good against the run, 14 run stops, 14 quarterback hurries, gives you pass rush juice on the inside. I guess what you're looking for is, all right, I don't think he'll become Mason Graham or Kenneth Grant in the 2025 year. That's probably unfair expectations to put on pretty much anybody. But can he be that number one? Can he still be the guy that can wreck some games for Michigan? Because I look at the rest of Michigan and say, hey, I think Trey Pierce has the ability to do that. I don't think a guy like DeMond Payne, I think Trey Williams, I like Trey Williams more than most people. So I think Trey Williams maybe has that chance. DeMond Payne and Trey Williams were brought in for, a deeper room, guys that can give you 30 quality snaps a game. If you're looking for the disruption that Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant gave you, you're probably looking to Rashawn Benny to be that guy for Michigan in 2025.
I think he's one of the most underappreciated Michigan players
I
the
agree.
last 2 to 3 years because he's been really solid. Again, he hasn't been Mason Graham. Nobody's been Mason Graham really for forever. It's like, but you look at what he does, just really steady. He doesn't get moved around a ton. I think he does give a little bit more playmaking ability than these numbers kind of indicate.
I agree.
Now he's got to be able to show it when he's playing a lot more because he
Yeah.
didn't play necessarily a ton.
That's a really good point. He's going to have to play a lot more snaps than he's had to play in the past, right? When you're getting rotated in with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, like those are the guys that are playing most of the snaps and you're playing as a rotational piece. Now you are the main piece. Can you be that guy for 400, 500 snaps a game? Or not a game, season. That's kind of what you're looking for Rashawn Benny. Dill, top 3, I think pretty let's just do this, right? So I went Jayshon Barm 3. I went Ernest Hausman 2. Why did I go Ernest Hausman 2, Jayshon Barm 3? I thought Ernest Hausman was the more consistent football player, especially in the back half of the year. Dill, Ernest Hausman's last 4 games were elite, and we'll get into Ernest Hausman in a second. Have Jayshon Barm coming into the 3 spot. If you told me Jayshon Barm was the best player on this Michigan roster in 2025, I wouldn't be all that surprised. I was not. Okay, I'll say this. Derek Moore is the guy that I wanted back the most for one more year. Jayshon Barm was a comfortable number 2 for me because what this kid can be is much better than what it was in 2024. And that's not to say it wasn't good in 2024, but still, we were getting the Devin Bush comps for Jayshon Barm last year in fall camp. He wasn't no Devin Bush last year. Can he, year 2 with Wink Martindale, be a linebacker that gives you a little bit more fingerprint on the football game? Because I look at 66 tackles, 4 TFLs, 1 sack. That's a good linebacker. That's not a great linebacker. Can you go be a great linebacker in 2025? That's what I'm looking for Jayshon Barm here.
And it's going to be interesting to see how they use him because I felt like he was really just pushed into like that standard run in the mill inside linebacker. And I think, like, again, he can play that and he can be good. I don't think he'll ever be unbelievably like great.
I don't think you unlock his potential by just doing that. You know what I mean? He's a guy that has so much more potential than just being an off-ball linebacker. Now the question is, all right, why? Why was he kind of boxed into that role? I think it was probably just because he's a new player on a new defense. It's like you can only ask a guy to do so much that's only been with your program for 6, 7 months, right? So now he gets a full offseason with this new defense. You could tell there was times where Jayshon Barm was probably had a little bit more on his plate with just playing off-ball linebacker last year. Like I don't think between the years he was completely dialed in. And that's not to say he wasn't trying. It's just like you could tell
No,
that
they
he
do have to
wasn't.
get him playing faster. They like again what he was playing like on Maryland, where his hair is on fire.
Yes.
He was rushing off the edge. He was blitzing from the inside, just being like asked to do some of those things that I think he can really shine at. I would be interested to see if Michigan can get him in to some of those spots where I think he can be more impactful. Because I look now that Hausman's kind of developed into a guy you really trust doing that off-ball linebacker role and being great at it. Because Ernest Hausman last couple of games was great at that.
Yeah.
I think Jayshon Barham's got to
Yeah,
do something.
I think that the best way to probably put it is, look, you're losing Mason Graham, you're losing Kenneth Grant, you're looking for the new engine of the defense? Like, who are going to be the guys that are the playmakers of the defense? I mean, you're probably looking at Ernest Hausmann and Jashawn Barm to be those kind of guys. Like, you're going to have both of them need to take a step from just being solid off-ball linebackers to all-American caliber, which I think they're both capable of doing. And Ernest Hausmann, 26 run stops, led the team, 0 missed tackles the last 4 games, only a 10% missed tackle rate. 90 tackles with a 10% missed tackle rate, elite stuff from Ernest Hausmann. And then number one, Michigan fans don't underrate him. The national media criminally underrates this kid, Derek Moore. He would have been a top 50 NFL draft pick, right? Comfortably. I think you're crazy if you don't take this kid in the top 50. 27 quarterback careers that led the team last year. Here's the thing with Demo: can you put your game-wrecking ability more in the stat sheet? Right? He's been a guy ever since his freshman year, has been a really disruptive presence for Michigan on the defensive line. Can you translate that to more than 4 sacks in the 2025 year? And Dill, I'd say that for really this Michigan defense as a whole. I felt like they were more disruptive last year than the stat sheet showed. Can Michigan, as a defense collectively, and especially Derek Moore, translate that 23.4% pass rush win rate, translate those 27 quarterback hurries? Can you translate those to 10 plus sacks for Derek Moore in 2025? That's how this Michigan defense takes that step in the 2025 year.
Yeah, and that's probably twofold. One, I think the secondary's got to get better. Got to be stickier. I think when you started to see that unit dial it in like they were against Alabama, you started to see the defensive line get a little bit more.
It's a really good point.
But I also think Derek Moore, like, I don't know that he'll ever be a 10 sack a year guy. Like, that's not really his pass rush game, if you will. Like, and I say that, like, is he a Von Miller type athlete on the edge? Is he that type of flexible guy who can, like, really rip it? He is a disruptor. That's kind of his game. He runs through guys. He's really, really strong. He's powerful. He's well-rounded in terms of, like, what he can do with his hands and getting off blocks. But I don't know if he'll ever be a 10 sack game guy, but I don't know that should, like, reflect as like he's not impactful on football games.
Well, he's number one for a reason on this football team, because I think his impact on the game goes far beyond what the 6 TFLs and 4 sacks reflect in the box score. I think there's that ability for him to just get home a little bit more. And I think that's what you're looking for this Michigan defense as a whole. They'll a lot of really good football players on this team, like guys that we know are good, Demo, Hausmann, Barm. And then there's just a lot of guys that, man, they could be, this top 10 list could look very, very different in the middle of October. And if you're a Michigan fan, you probably want it to look a little different.
Like, get more offensive guys on the list.
I think we had 2, right? Look, who are the guys that could be on the list on offense in 2 months? Bryce Underwood, for sure. Marshall and Justice Haynes, I think 100%. D. McCully, but I think you're probably right. This is a Michigan team that shouldn't have no offensive linemen on our preseason top 10 players. That's what you want to see. And look, I think there's some capability for Michigan to get there, but that's going to be a really important storyline. I think you're right. Which offensive linemen, show that they're top 10 players on this roster. All right. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Long one, Michigan fans. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.